Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Aamsuntitledpodcast. I'm Am. Hi, if you just stumbled across this podcast is fairly new. It's been about 2 months since I started, and I'm really enjoying doing this. I've done my entire reviews of the Percy Jackson series. They're up on my YouTube channel and they're up on my Spotify as well, so go and check those out. But today's episode is going to be talking about the Lightning Thief book. So, the first book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. I am so excited to be talking about this. Like, I've been itching since I rewatched the show for specifically for these podcasts to do the review. I've been itching to get back into the books, and now I'm finally doing it. And I finished the book last night. It took me 4 days because I had a uni assignment due at the same time. So I was having to sort of multitask and carve out time to do both because obviously this podcast is just as important to me as my uni work is. It's a hobby, but for me it's more of a passion thing. So it gets equal importance in my eyes. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now. I finished the book last night. I've decided that I'm going to have to split this into 2 episodes just because I've gone through each chapter and I'm going to talk about the main bits in each chapter. So I feel like trying to squeeze it all into one episode might be a bit difficult episode because knowing how much I ramble could go on for like 2-3 hours and I wouldn't even realize. So I think the best thing for me to do is to just split it. So what I've done is I went by the chapters, and there's 22 chapters in the first book. So I'm going to be sharing the first 11 chapters, like my thoughts on the first 11, I think. Is it first 11? Oh no, first 12 actually. Hold on a minute, how does that work? How is that the middle of the book then? Yeah, basically I'm going to go till the middle of the book in this one. And then, yeah. I think there's a lot more to talk about in the second half of the book, so maybe it's best that there's probably less chapters for me to review in the second half of the book. But yeah, I'm really excited. Let's go on with it because I've already been talking for 2 minutes. Right, let's go. So, chapter one is I accidentally vaporized my algebra teacher, which can I just say, like, or just one thing before I go into the chapter is that Rick is so good at making chapter titles. Like, they're always so quirky and so fun and so interesting, and I really like that about his writing style. So yeah, the chapter opens with the line, "Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood," and can I just say, what an incredible opening to a story! Like, I remember reading that when I was a kid and being like, "Whoa, what's a half-blood?" Like, obviously, I was very young, guys. I hadn't read the books yet, and I was like, "Wow, this is quite an intriguing opening line." And then the chapter opens at the Met, and it's basically just Nancy Boba Fett picking on Percy, bullying him. He's not had a very good experience with bullies before. And, him and Grover are both targets of her shenanigans, let's just say. And then the main sort of idea of the chapter is that it introduced is it Mr. Bruno or Mr. Brunner? You see, in the show, they call it Mr. Brunner, but I used to say it as Mr. Bruner. So I don't know if I'm wrong or like, mind you, I think I used to pronounce Luke's last name wrong as well, which is why I refuse to say it on the podcast. It's like Luke, and everybody knows who I'm talking about. But yeah, I've not had a very good experience pronouncing names in the show. Mrs. Dodds and Grover, obviously, they're the three central characters, aside from Percy in the show. And not in the show, in the book, for God's sake. Okay, because I've been doing the reviews and I've been talking about the show and now talking about the books is like, well, okay, calm down. Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, so, when it's one thing that really stood out to me about this chapter as I was reading it was the bit where Grover and Percy are talking about Mrs. Dodds, and he says that she can't possibly be human, and I'm like, wow, that's like such a big hint. Like, obviously, when I read it for the first time, didn't pick up on that at all, but now that this is my third time reading the books, I'm like, what an interesting like line for Percy to say. It's almost like Rick's sort of giving a hint to the audience that there's something coming, and Grover doesn't really say anything. He's just like, yeah, I guess. And then, Mr. Bruner talks to Percy about, the Titans, and he tells him something really interesting, which is like, everything that you've learned from me can be applied to your real life. There's so many hints that there's something underlying going on, and like something that even Percy, the character at this point, doesn't know. And Mr. Brunner tells him, I expect great things from you. And that's a lot of pressure. Like, for a 12-year-old, that's like a lot of pressure. And it's a really nice thing because it's like, it's not explicitly telling the audience what they want to hear. It's just that, oh, be prepared because this kid, he's in for a wild ride, basically. And, one thing that I've learned about Percy in this is that, and it's a theme throughout the books that I remember, is that he gets very uncontrollably angry. Like his anger levels are insane. And I don't know if that's just part of his demigod nature or if that's part of his ADHD. I'm not really sure. But yeah, he gets Nancy Boba Fett is constantly picking on him and Grover. Then one time he gets so pissed off and he just, unintentionally pushes her into the fountain. It's the water that drags her into the fountain. And, Mrs. Dodds pulls him aside because obviously she hates Percy anyway. And this is just kind of giving her more of a reason. It's sort of telling the audience that there's a reason why she hates him, which I think is really interesting. And, as she pulls him aside, she starts to transform into a Fury, which, if you don't know what a Fury is, it's a lieutenant of Hades. They're basically torturers. And, there's one bit where Mr. Brunner and Grover realize that he's gone missing, like Percy's just disappeared out of nowhere, and they go after him. And as he's being attacked by the Fury, Mr. Brunner throws a pen at Percy, which transforms into a sword, which is Riptide. I can't remember the Greek name for it, so you're just gonna have to just go. We're going with the English name. And Percy kills her, and all of a sudden, like he wakes up and he realizes there's nobody actually there. And he goes to everybody and he's like, "Oh, has anybody seen Mrs. Dodds?" And everybody's like, "There is no teacher here called Mrs. Dodds." Like even like Mr. Brunner and Grover denying that she was even there. Now Percy feels like, "What the hell just happened?" And it's such a if you're reading the books for the first time, you're gonna be like, "But Mr. Brunner and Grover were there when Percy was being attacked. Like, how can they possibly deny it?" But then that goes in further into the book, I guess. That's a nice loose thread for Rick to pull later on, I guess you could say. And then yeah, that's where the chapter sort of ends. Moving on to chapter 2, and it's called Three Old Ladies Knit the Socks of Death, which I think it's such a cool title, I swear. Honestly, Rick's titles always crack me up. And I'm so happy that, sorry, going on a tangent here, Heroes of Olympus tangent. But like in Heroes of Olympus, the chapters don't have names. They're just obviously the name of the character whose point of view it is. But the first line of the chapters are always hilarious, and you can just tell that it's Rick's writing. I really appreciate that about his writing. A bit of comedic relief is nice every now and again. And it opens up on this idea that Percy knows that Grover is lying to him about Mrs. Dodds. He knows for a fact that Grover knows that Mrs. Dodds was actually a thing and that he's not going crazy. And then, it sort of opens with him getting kicked out of Yancey Academy. And, as he's walking back to his dorm room, he can hear Grover and Mr. Brunner talking in Mr. Brunner's office. And he's sort of eavesdropping on them. And all he hears is the word summer solstice. And obviously Percy doesn't have a clue what that is. And he's basically put like two pieces of the puzzle together and he's like, okay, I'm in danger, but what am I in danger from? In other words. And Mr. Brunner tells him that, Yancey Academy, they've kind of done you a favor by kicking you out because I don't think that it's the right place for you. And when Percy goes to question Grover about summer solstice, he just denies it. He's like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Grover. I can't imagine how difficult it must be for him to lie to his best friend. Grover gives him a card eventually with his number. It's really nicely shown in the book, and it's basically got his name, contact number, and his location of where he'll be for the summer, just in case Percy ever needs his help. And it's so interesting because as they're walking past, Percy and Grover spot these three old ladies who are just sitting there knitting, and he's sort of like turns around like as he's walked past them and he hears like a little snip. And if you haven't worked it out by now, those are the three fates. And if you don't know what the fates are, they weave the life strand of every living thing. So basically, when you hear or see a string being cut, it means that somebody is going to die. And Grover's like, they were looking at you. And Percy tells him, I heard them snip the string. And Grover's like, oh my God, this is really not good. And he's proper panicking. So sweet. Such a caring best friend. And the chapter just sort of ends with Percy realizing that he asked Grover, doesn't a thread mean that someone's gonna die? And Grover's just like, yeah. That's how the chapter ends. I like that so far that the first few chapters they've left like a lot of things untold, which is great. Like I believe in any good storytelling, you can't give the audience everything they want to know straight away. You have to give them a chance to process what you're saying and really make them almost have an epiphany about what's going on, basically. And chapter 3, which is Grover unexpectedly loses his pants, which is because as I'm going back and I'm rereading things, I'm just like, wow, Uncle Rick's writing is just insane. So the main theme in this chapter is sort of the introduction of Sally Jackson. And if you don't know much about her, her parents died in a plane crash when she was really small. I think she was 5 at the time, I believe. And then she ended up having a guardian who was her uncle, who wasn't very good at taking care of her. And yeah, she sort of grew up not really being loved by anybody, and she always wanted to be a novelist, but she dropped out of college to look after, I think it was her uncle when he fell ill. So bless her, she's a really, really hardworking woman. One of those people that you feel sorry for because they have so much potential, and that potential can never be explored because of their life situations. And I think that that's so heartbreaking. But yeah, and she always told Percy, your father's not dead, like he's just lost at sea. And I like that. I like that because it's such a nice hint to the audience that, ooh, Percy's dad is like, he's not gone, like completely out of Percy's life. He's just missing, which I think is a nice little hint there. And then, you get sort of an introduction to Smelly Gabe, freaking arsehole. No offense, excuse me, French. He's just a drunk alcoholic who plays poker. Nothing really special about him there whatsoever. And, Percy sort of reunites with his mother and she surprises him with a trip to Montauk. So Montauk is where Sally Jackson met Sidon for the first time. But oh shit. Do you know what? I'm just gonna throw this out here. I'm gonna spoil the book. I'm gonna talk about spoilers because I know the series so well. It's so difficult for me to not say things. And it's basically the place where Sally met Percy's father for the first time. So it has kind of like a special place in her heart. She has like a little beach house there that she takes Percy to. So sort of their idea of a summer holiday, basically. And the book sort of goes into a bit more about the relationship between Percy and Gabe, and it's just a horrible relationship. Like he's such a what's the nice word here? He's not a very good father, let's just put it like that. And it's just sort of talks about Percy's love for blue food. It's kind of like an inside joke between him and his mom, just something that they bond over. It's so nice. Do you know what? It's one of those chapters where I wouldn't call it a filler chapter, but it's more of give the audience a bit of a background as to why they're in the situation that they're in, why the main character is stuck where they are. And I think that it was one of those good moments. I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. No, it's gone. It's fine. We'll carry on. And then, you know, Sally sort of tells him that, your father really never got to meet you because he knew that I was pregnant with you, but he never got to see you, basically. So, which means that his father left before he was born. And I think that sort of makes Percy feel kind of neglected in a sense because it's like, oh, you couldn't even stick around to see me be born. But obviously, there's a reason for everything, and we'll come to that later on. And, Sally tells him that, I have to send you somewhere to protect you. You can't stay here with me. And, Percy talks about, like, sort of, when he was at previous schools, because he's been kicked out of schools a few times, like, he talks about the things he's encountered over the years. And there's a nice big list of them in the book. I'm not going to go into that right now. But yeah. And, as they enter this beach, like, it it's sort of it's a good scene change because it's like you're bringing Percy to the foundation of his being, which sounds silly when you say it out loud, but that's where obviously his parents met. That's where, you know, everything sort of began for him, metaphorically and literally. And, Percy finds out about Camp Half-Blood. His mom sort of says, oh, there's this place I can take you where you'll be safe. And just as she's talking about it, there's a massive hurricane outside and Grover appears. But this time, obviously, like Grover before looks human, but he's not actually human. He's a satyr, which means that he's got goat legs. He appears in front of Percy. And he sort of says to Percy, did you tell her about what happened with Mrs. Dodds? And obviously Percy didn't bother mentioning that to his mother. And she's like, what? And yeah, that's sort of like the end of the chapter. So it's more of like an exploration into Sally and Percy's relationship. And also, I think it's kind of the first turning point in the story where you realize that this kid actually has something really special about him and his entire life's about to be flipped upside down. Which brings me on to the next chapter, which is chapter 4, which is My Mother Teaches Me Bullfighting. Ah, lovely, lovely chapter. Introduction to the first monster that first Percy is going to face, basically. So the scene starts in the car with Percy and Grover and Sally, and Grover's basically telling him, I've been watching over you. Like your mom knew I've been watching over you. Mr. Brunner has sent me to watch over you, basically. And then Percy finds out that Grover is a satyr. If you don't know what a satyr is, half man, half goat. And you know, he said, Grover tells him, you're wanted by Hades, which is why Mrs. Dodds was chasing you, in other words. And then Sally tells him that she needs to take him to Camp Half Blood, which is Long Island, New York. Um, so, well, for the pure reason that he's in danger, in other words. And then the Minotaur appears. If you don't know what a Minotaur is, it's man half bull. That's the only way I can say it. I don't know if there's any other way you can say it. I know that when I read the books for the first time, I never used to read it as Minotaur. I used to read it as Minotaur. But since they started saying Minotaur in the show, like I can't go back to saying Minotaur. It's Minotaur now. I said it in my podcast. It's Minotaur. And Percy sees basically the car crashes, and Sally Jackson tells him, you need to go make it to Camp Half Blood. Like I'll distract the Minotaur and save you. In other words. And then, just as the Minotaur picks Sally up to kill her, she dissolves right in front of Percy's eyes. And I think that's kind of like a changing point in Percy's life, because this woman who has always done everything to. Oh, fuck. That hurt. Sorry, I just hit my hand against my laptop screen. Ow. Sorry. Let's carry on. Um, yeah. And what was I talking about? Oh yeah, the changing point. And I think this is where the audience see one of the biggest changes in Percy, seeing more of the demigod side come out. And he charges at the Minotaur, and he doesn't even remember like the way he killed him or how he killed him. And he eventually collapses on the ground, unconscious, but he can hear somebody talking in the background. They've ended up outside Camp Half-Blood, basically, and Annabeth appears, and she says, "He's the one. He must be." And it's such a nice, like, big, like, I don't think there's a bigger hint to the audience that you could possibly give that this kid is in for something really special. And Mr. Brunner tells them to bring him inside so that they can look after him, basically, and nurse him back to health. Let's put it like that. So the next chapter, which is chapter 5, which is I play Pinnacle with a horse. Now I didn't know, I couldn't remember what that was, because it's not, well, they don't really talk about it in the show, and I kind of forgot about it because I haven't read the books in a while. But Pinnacle is basically a game, and Percy, in the scene, opens with him sort of waking up, and he sees Grover, and Grover gives him the Minotaur horn. And the reason why the Minotaur horn didn't disappear is because it's a spoil of war. So whoever kills it can just say that it's basically proof that that person has done what they've said they've done. And then Percy realizes that his mom is actually gone, and he thinks that she's dead, which, judging by the scene that he's just seen, makes the most sense. And obviously, it's such a heartbreaking moment for the readers of the book, because they're like, "Whoa, like this kid overnight has just lost everything," and it's so sad. And it's basically Grover telling him that he feels so guilty, like it was his job to protect Percy, and he failed. And Grover makes him drink nectar and ambrosia. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically something that demigods eat or drink to help them heal, in other words, to speed up the healing process. And I can't even read my handwriting. Yeah, I don't know what that says. Anyway, let's move on. And then Percy sees Mr. D. So if you don't know who Mr. D is, he's a camp director. So he's in charge of the camp, and he's actually a god. So he's Dionysus, god of wine, basically. And he realizes that Annabeth and Chiron. I think this chapter is touching more on the introduction of those three characters, because obviously we already know Mr. Brunner from previous chapters, but I think talking about Annabeth and Dionysus is the way Rick's done it. Like, he's given each character kind of like, even though the books are written from Percy's perspective, like the way he introduces characters is really cool. Like, it's a really intelligent way that he does it. And Percy finds out that Annabeth is the one that nursed him back to health. Somebody who doesn't even know him, and she's still looked after him. And then Chiron asks her to show him around camp. And the first thing that she says to him, the reason why my shipping heart is the way that it is, the reason why Percabeth is my favorite ship of all time is the line that she says, which is "You drool when you sleep," and it's just such a good line. Like they haven't had like a really good conversation yet. Like they barely know each other, and it's the first thing she says is "You drool when you sleep." One of my favorite lines from this book. Like this, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite dialogues in the book. I've written some of them out, but that's going to be one of my favorites in the book. And Chiron tells Percy that the Greek gods are actually in fact real, and Mr. D, obviously he's a god himself, and if you don't know, a reoccurring theme in the books is that Percy doesn't believe in the gods. Like no matter what happens, like he has no faith in them whatsoever. And then Mr. D starts to get really angry with him, like how is it possible that you know you can't believe in this sort of stuff? Like it's not remotely possible. And then Percy D, wow. Wow, we just went completely wrong there. Percy finds out that obviously Mr. D is Dionysus, and you know, he was he basically Mr. D tells him why he's working as the camp activities director instead of being on Olympus with the other gods, and it's basically a punishment from Zeus. I can't necessarily for the life of me remember why he's being punished. I think it has something to do with having an affair, but I'm not sure. So don't quote me on that, but I'll have to look into that again. I think it's in the book. I can't remember. Like I said, because I've done this over 4 days, like my entire brain is like normally when I don't have to take notes for the podcast, like I read the book within 2 days, so everything's kind of fresh in my mind. But because I've been doing uni work at the same time, it's not my brain is not necessarily there. And Percy finds out that obviously if you don't know, Olympus sort of moves. Is it according to the west, I believe, or something? So at the minute Olympus is currently residing above New York City, specifically above the Empire State Building. And then Percy asks Chiron about who he is. Excuse me. And Chiron tells him, go to cabin 11, basically. So if cabin 11 is Hermes' cabin. So Hermes is the god of travelers. So his cabin is home to children who are actually his own children and children who don't have or have not been claimed by their godly parents. It's basically more of like a middle of the road cabin where if you're claimed or unclaimed, it doesn't really matter, basically. And then it's so funny at the end of the scene, Mr. Brunner slash Chiron stands up and obviously the mist has disappeared. The mist is the veil that guides the mortal world from obviously this world, and Percy realizes that he's a centaur, so half horse, half man. Yeah, it's really funny. And Chiron says, "Why don't you go and meet the other campers?" And that's where the chapter ends. So chapter 6 is I become the supreme lord of the bathroom, which probably one of my favorite chapters in the book. And Chiron takes Percy around Camp Half-Blood, and they're talking about Grover. Like Percy's like, "Oh, don't be too hard on him. Like what happened that night on the hill wasn't necessarily his fault, and that he's actually a really good protector." And then Chiron says, "It's not up to me. He's going to be judged by the Cloven Council of Elders." Because obviously they're in charge, in other words. And Percy finds out about Capture the Flag, and he realizes that Chiron is the Chiron from Greek mythology who trained many great heroes like Hercules. And he tells him that Annabeth is waiting for him. So it's sort of basically become Annabeth's job to guide him to cabin 11, and she tells him. Well, she doesn't tell him that he's unclaimed, but she sort of explains to the cabin mates that look, he's not got his Greek godly parent hasn't claimed him yet. And then one bit about this chapter is that Percy comes face to face with Luke for the first time, and he sort of asks him like, "Oh, do you know who your dad is?" Blah blah blah. They have this conversation, and Percy does something really awkward, which I can't remember, and Annabeth sort of drags him out of the cabin. And she tells him that he should be grateful that he got the chance to fight the Minotaur. And then, Percy's like, why would anybody be grateful to face a monster? And it's basically Annabeth has been training her entire life. She's one of the best people at camp, and she's never gotten an opportunity like what Percy did. So I guess maybe that's why she's holding a grudge against him. I don't know. And she tells Percy that his father actually isn't dead. And she explains to him like why he has ADHD, and it's basically because it's to do with his battle reflexes. The reason why he can't sit still is because he's half demigod. His body has been trained to be fighting monsters essentially, and obviously that doesn't necessarily work in the actual world. And she tells him that he's a half blood, and then eventually Percy comes across Clarice, who see, and I'm just so much. It's like it made me laugh as if I've never read the books before, but I'm just like, she's just honestly such her humor in these books is so underrated. Like she has the ability to say things with such a straight face that are hilarious. Like Clarice is a really scary person. Like I wouldn't want her to be my bully, but she's really funny. And some of the stuff that she says in the books, like I can't wait to talk about some of her one-liners from the book. They crack me up. And Percy said, Percy gets dragged into an initiation ceremony in um inverted commas. And she drags him to the bathroom, and all of a sudden the pipes burst and it attacks her, basically. Ow. Why did I just do that? I just hit my hand again, for God's sake. And then Annabeth asks him how he did that, how is it that he could control the water? And he says that he doesn't know. And Annabeth tells him that, I want you to be on my team for capture the flag, basically. So he's basically just proven that he could be a valuable member of her team. And that's where the chapter ends. Chapter 7, which is My Dinner Goes Up in Smoke. It opens with Annabeth telling Percy his father is an Olympian, so basically one of the Greek gods. And Annabeth tells him that she is the daughter of Athena. If you don't know who Athena is, she's the goddess of wisdom and warfare, and that her dad is actually a mortal who is a professor. And then, Percy's adamant that his father, like when they're talking about his father, he was like, oh no, my father would have told my mother he loved her so much that he would have told her that he was a Greek god. And, Annabeth tells him that sometimes the gods do just ignore their children, and you've just basically got to be okay with that, in other words. And then she tells him the story of how she arrived at camp when she was 7. Um, and she talks about her experience on Olympus as well. And yeah, so it's basically more showing more of the bond between Percy and Annabeth, because obviously up until this moment they've never had like proper conversation as friends, you could say. Well, to be honest, at this point I wouldn't say that they're friends either. I think they're more of just acquaintances, and they just sort of put up with each other, which is all about to change. And then Luke talks to Percy um and asks if he's ever met his dad, which is Hermes. And obviously, if you don't know, Hermes and Luke's relationship is really complicated, and it's just probably not something you want to bring up with Luke. And it's so funny because all the campers are sat together and they're making like a toast to the gods. But what made me laugh was Percy made a toast to his mother, not the gods. So this reoccurring theme of him not believing in them, but he's still thinking about his mom. Like even though she might be gone and she might be dead, like he's still remembering her all the time, and I think that that's just so sweet. And then they're talking about burning offerings, like to get your Greek god prepared and potentially you have to burn an offering. And he just sort of burns something, and he says, all I want is for my father to reveal his identity. And it's such a big thing, like being unclaimed. I think must have been so difficult for him because he's known such love from his mother. Like it must be so difficult for him to comprehend why his father doesn't want anything to do with him. So I think that that scene's really important. It's really sad, actually. It was a really sad way to end the chapter. And Mr. D introduces Percy Jackson as a new camper, and the chapter ends with Percy feeling like he finally has a place in the world, that this is where he was supposed to be. So there's some really bittersweet moments in this chapter, and I think that's probably why it's one of my favorites, because it's such like the turning point has already happened, but it's given Percy something in return. Like even though he's lost his mother, he's gained a family, you could say. Well, a feeling like he has people that love and support him, which I think is so nice. So chapter 8 is We Capture a Flag. Now I was really excited for this chapter because capture the flag is one of my favorite things that Rick has included in the story. And it's basically open this up upon this idea that Luke is teaching Percy the rules of swordsmanship. and he's been known, this is explicitly stated in the books, that he's known as the best swordsman in 300 years of being at camp. And Percy finds out that Haley doesn't have a cabin at Camp Half-Blood, the same way he doesn't have a throne on Olympus anymore. And he also finds out that basically Luke tells him that Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, like, they made this oath and they swore on the river Styx, which is the most sacred oath that you can have, that they won't father any more children because their children were becoming too powerful and causing too much of an issue. And Percy finds out about Thalia from Luke, who is Zeus's forbidden daughter. So basically, he broke the oath. Oh, big deal. I hope they've all broken the oath. Spoiler, they've all broken the oath. And then, Grover tries to convince Percy that he isn't a child of the big three. But I think deep down, Grover does know that Percy is a child of the big three. Like, I sort of caught on, like, even when I read the books for the first time, that he'd be a child of the big three, because there's just so many obvious hints. And, this kid, he's always felt so out of place. Like, it doesn't make sense for him to not, like, be a child of the big three and just be one of a more, what's the word? Inferior god? Oh god, that sounds awful when I say it out loud. And then Percy says, okay, so whose team are we on in Capture the Flag? Obviously, he knows that he's on Annabeth's team, which is the Athena cabin. And Luke tells him that, they have the Hermes cabin also has an alliance with the Athena cabin. And then, there's one bit where Percy's talking about all the cabins at Camp Half-Blood. It's a really beautiful explanation written by Rick. But the way that Percy describes the Ares cabin just cracks me up. Obviously, he's dealt with bullies before. He doesn't like Clarice or any of her cabin mates. So just that, the way he describes it in the book just cracks me up. If you guys ever read the books, please, like, let me know, like, your favorite moments, because Persassy is he's such an incredible character. The way Rick has given that side to him as well is just up there, one of my favorite things. But Annabeth tells him, I have a plan to win Capture the Flag. And then there's a scene where obviously, I think Percy gets put on Border Patrol or something. Is that what it's called? Border Patrol? And Clarice comes to attack him, and he starts saying some. He starts giving her attitude basically, and there's one line that Clarice says that cracks me up, and she goes, "Cream the punk." Clarice, she's just one of the funniest characters ever. Like, what she does to Percy, I don't agree with, like the way she bullies him, but her character arc through these books is probably one of the best. And she's definitely one of the funniest characters. And you can tell she's a Rick Riordan character. The way that she's been written, you can just tell that she's a Rick character. And then Percy basically defeats Clarice, and Capture the Flag ends with victory. Basically, the Athena cabin and all the cabins that were backing her won. And then Percy finds out that Annabeth actually intentionally put him there so Clarice would come and attack him. Like she said, she had a plan, and her plan was to use Percy to win, essentially. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, being used by your future girlfriend there's nothing wrong with that. And Percy says that, look, I've got like a massive cut on my arm. And Annabeth looks at it and she's like, Percy, there's no cut there anymore. Like, it's sort of like faded and it's just like a scratch. And I think in that moment, Annabeth's clocked on as to who Percy's father is, but she doesn't want to tell him, obviously, until she's sure. And then just as Capture the Flags ended, another threat comes into Camp Half-Blood, which is a hellhound. And, they realize that somebody's summoned it into camp. Like, it doesn't just come without being called, basically. And Clarice blames Percy. So funny. Like, Percy did it. They're so petty in the books. I don't remember that. That's probably because they're only 12 and like 13. Well, is Clarice the same age? I don't think she is. Maybe she's a little bit older, but still, it's just this little petty childish banter. Because we have to remember that they are kids at the end of the day. Like, as the books progress, like they get older and they start maturing. But this is just the first book, so they're bound to act like this, and it's so funny. And then the chapter sort of comes to an end with Percy being claimed by Poseidon. And the way the scene is described in the books is so beautiful. Chiron basically talks about him. He says, Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses, which doesn't get enough credit. Like Poseidon has always been associated with horses, and that's not something that gets touched on enough. So I'm glad that Rick put that in there. And he's put Hail Perseus Jackson, son of the sea god, which I think, oh my God, what an introduction. Like, the way Chiron words things, he has such a way with words. It's amazing. And that scene has got to be one of my favorites, the scene where Percy gets claimed. Now let's move on to chapter 9, which is I'm offered a quest. And then, obviously, because Percy has been claimed, he gets moved into the Poseidon cabin. He doesn't have any cabin mates because obviously he's a forbidden child. And then Percy finds out that Gabe has accused him for in the disappearance of his mother, because obviously in the mortal world, Sally and Percy have just disappeared. They don't know what's happened to Sally and what's happened to Percy. And then Chiron offers Percy a quest to retrieve Zeus's master bolt, which has been stolen. And he also tells him that actually Zeus thinks that you're the one that stole it. And, he tells him, you need to go and speak with the oracle. So Percy seeks out the oracle and she tells him this prophecy. I've written the whole prophecy down because I'm extra. So she says, you shall go west and face the god who has turned. You shall find what was stolen and see it safely returned. You shall be betrayed by the one who calls you a friend, and you shall fail to save what matters most in the end. And just the way Rick wrote that prophecy is just insane. I even enjoyed saying it out loud. It's so cool. And the oracle turns. It's so funny because as the oracle's turning, like she takes the shape of Gabe and his friends. So she takes the shape of somebody who Percy hates anyway, and it's just so funny that he tells him the prophecy. And then Chiron tells Percy that the Master Bolt is actually with Hades in the underworld, and he can't travel. Basically, like the underworld is seen as being in Los Angeles, I believe, from what I can remember. And Chiron tells him, you can't get on a plane because Zeus is angry with you. Like he could just strike you straight out of the sky and kill you. And Annabeth volunteers herself for the quest, but she's like, I because this is something she's been waiting for, like since she's been at camp. Like Chiron's forever promised her that there'll be somebody that will come who she's fated to go on a quest with, and she sees this as that opportunity, and she jumps at it. Basically, I would too. I'd be like, I want to go on a quest. That's sick. Right, last two chapters we're going to talk about, which is chapter 10, which is I ruin a perfectly good bus. So the scene that the chapter opens with is the trio leaving Camp Half-Blood, and Luke gives Percy his wing shoes and wishes him luck. Wing shoes, very important. Very important if you've not read the books. Pay attention to that. That's very important. And then it's this is the bit where when I first read the books, I thought it was a little bit controversial, but as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's okay to have a crush on somebody that's older than you. Most people who have celebrity crushes are like 10, 15 years older than them, so there's nothing wrong with this. And it's very obviously stated in the book that Annabeth has a crush on Luke, and obviously Percy knows about this. And I think it's so funny because it sort of plays up like that crush causes so many problems for Percy and Annabeth. Like it's unbelievable. A lot of their tension in their relationship is because of Luke. And I can't wait to talk more about that in future books. I'm not going to go into that now. I'm not going to spoil the rest of the books. And Chiron gives him Riptide, which is his blade, the sword that's made of celestial bronze. And then Annabeth tells Percy that she basically tells Percy that they can't be friends. They're supposed to be rivals because obviously Poseidon and Athena are rivals. And the reason why they're rivals is because there's two main reasons. Pardon me. Two main reasons why they're rivals. One is because Athena once caught Poseidon and his girlfriend. We'll talk a bit more about that I think it'll be in the next few chapters. Maybe not in this episode, maybe in the next episode. Because Athena caught Poseidon and his girlfriend in an Athenian temple, which is very disrespectful. If you're going to go somewhere to do something, please don't do it in a temple. Have some respect. And then the second reason is because Athena won the title of patron god of Athens against Poseidon. The people chose her instead of Poseidon. So there's two reasons why um, Athena and Poseidon don't get along. And Annabeth basically thinks that she can't get along with him because her mother hates Percy's father. Which in turn doesn't really make any sense to me since the gods don't really interact with their children, so their affair shouldn't really affect their children, but whatever. And, Grover tells Percy that his mother married Gabe to protect him because obviously Gabe has such a horrible stench, it was able to scare away the monsters so Percy would be safe. And I can't imagine the guilt that Percy must feel. His mom sacrificed her youth. She married a guy that she had no interest in to protect him. And I think there's nothing bigger than Sally Jackson's sacrifice for him. And then just as they get to a bus tunnel and they're sat on the bus, the trio get attacked by Furies. Annabeth tells Percy to escape and she gives him her Yankees cap, which is her invisibility cap, which was a gift from her mother. And, Percy just can't stand by and watch Grover and Annabeth get hurt, so he decides to crash the bus. And they manage to escape out the bus, and thunder booms in the sky, and the bus goes up in bits along with all their stuff. But the trio somehow manages to escape. Right, second to last chapter I'm going to talk about, which is chapter 11, which is, we visit the Garden Gnome Emporium, and Percy and Annabeth they've basically got an ongoing argument. I called it a lovers spat, but they're not lovers yet. Um, over what happened on the bus. And eventually the trio arrive outside Auntie M's, and Grover spots Uncle Ferdinand. He can smell monsters, but Annabeth says that's probably just because we've been traveling underground and stuff. And she just dismisses him. Rookie mistake, never dismiss anything. And the trio eventually comes face to face with Auntie M, and they tell her, we're orphans from a traveling circus. And the place that they're in, the way Rick describes it in the book, like I can't summarize it, but they see a place just full of statues, essentially. And Auntie M tells them that she must cherish every customer she gets. So already from the beginning, like Rick is giving you warnings that this woman is not to be trusted. And obviously, because the kids are so tired and they're still young at the end of the day, they're going to dismiss things. And Auntie M tells them about her story, about how she ended up this way. And Annabeth realizes that she's in fact Medusa. And Auntie M asks them for a photograph. And then Grover keeps looking. He goes, "Oh, that statue looks a lot like my Uncle Ferdinand." And then eventually he started to put the pieces of the puzzle together too. And he realizes that it actually is Uncle Ferdinand. And then Annabeth puts on her Yankees cap and disappears. And then it's revealed that Auntie M is in fact Medusa. And Annabeth tells Percy to cut off Medusa's head. She says that she can't do it, so he has to do it. And then it sort of comes to a conclusion with Percy cutting off Medusa's head. And then he finds out that Medusa was in fact the one that was caught with Poseidon in the Athenian temple. Imagine how embarrassing that must be for him. Like, if I just found out my dad was having an affair with a woman in an Athenian temple, I'd pass out too. And then he realizes that that's why Medusa is who she is. It's a punishment from Athena for embarrassing her in front of everybody, basically. Athena doesn't take embarrassment lightly, let's just put it like that. And then the chapter sort of ends with Percy's idea to ship Medusa's head to Olympus against Annabeth and Grover's much better judgment, because they said that it will make the gods angry. They'll see it as impertinent. And Percy says his famous line, "I am impertinent." That's where the chapter ends. So the last chapter I'm going to be talking about in this podcast, because I've realised that I've been rattling on for nearly 45 minutes. I'm talking about 12 chapters. I am so happy I've decided to split this episode in half. You guys are never ever going to be able to sit here and listen to me for over 2 hours talking about the book. Anyway, so the last chapter, which is chapter 12, which is we get advice from a pink poodle. So the trio has finally got to safety and they're camping outside. Grover tells Percy about Pan. So if you don't know who Pan is the god of the wild. And, he says that it's his dream to be a searcher. And he talks about Uncle Ferdinand because his Uncle Ferdinand was also a searcher who was on the quest to look for Pan. And then, as they're talking about Annabeth, Grover tells Percy not to be so hard on him, on her, because she's had quite a rough ride since she got to camp. And then Percy tells Grover that he's only on the quest because he wants to save his mother. He's not got any interest in helping his father, which I think that's kind of what he's convinced himself that he's doing. I don't think that's necessarily how he truly feels about his father. And even Grover says it, I think that's just what you're trying to tell yourself. I don't think that's necessarily the truth. And then eventually Percy sort of falls asleep and he dreams about a voice that tells him to bring him the Master Ball. Now, Percy gets these dreams throughout the books and they're so important, so I'll be talking more about them in the future chapters. And then Grover eventually finds a pink poodle for Gladiola. Is that how you say it? Gladiola? That's how it's spelled. I don't know if that's how you say it. And, Gladiola guides them west onto an Amtrak train, which will take them to where the next part of their quest is going to take place. And that's where the chapter ends. So my final thoughts on the first half of the book, I thought that it was a really nice light-hearted opening, but it had some really emotional, bittersweet scenes, which I love. That's what I appreciate so much about Rick's writing and Rick's style, is that he's not afraid to put these high tension moments, but also these comedic, sad, sometimes emotional scenes. I really appreciate that about his writing style. I love that each character is given a really unique introduction that suits that character. And, I can't wait to talk more about backstories of the characters in future books, in the next half of this book. You draw when you sleep is probably my favourite line from the first half of the books. My favourite Percabeth line, definitely. And, it keeps the readers on the edge as you read the book, like you just want to keep reading. Believe me, all I wanted to do was to keep reading. And, Rick's titled for chapters, I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. He always has some really quirky, fun titles that keep you excited and keep you wanting to read more. So overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the read. I really enjoyed taking the notes for it. I had some laughing moments, I had some sad moments, and I really, really love these books. I don't think there'll ever be a series for me that tops Percy Jackson. In all these years of reading books, I've been reading since I was properly reading since I was probably 8 or 9, almost for 10 years of my life, and I've never come across a book series that I love more than Percy Jackson. Harry Potter is definitely up there. The Shadow and Bone books, Six of Crows, they're definitely up there, but Percy Jackson has such a special place in my heart. I've just dropped my notebook on the floor. It literally just slid off my leg. Um, and I love it so much, and I'm so excited to keep reviewing these. So then let me know, what's your favorite book from the series? Do you guys have a favorite book? Like I've always said, my favorite from the last time that I read these books is 5. But what I'm going to do is once I've reviewed all the books, maybe when I'm talking about um the last book, I'm going to talk about which one's my favorite and why it's my favorite. Or maybe I'll just do a whole separate episode on that, on why certain books are my favorite, maybe why I didn't like other books as much. And yeah, I love Rick's writing. If you've never read it and you're interested in getting into reading, definitely read his work. He is amazing. He creates characters that you love, he creates characters that you hate with everything in you. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. And I'm so aware this is so long, and I will try to speed up a little bit more in the next episode. There's just so much to talk about in these books, and because I'm so passionate about them, you can probably hear from my excitement. I get really passionate about this, and it's because I genuinely love it. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I really appreciate it. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about this last half of the book. I think the last 10 chapters, I believe. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for listening in. I really appreciate it. Big hug to anybody that needs it. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Mwah. Bye.